Hi everyone, my name is Bruno Mano. I am a partner and a professor here at Link School. I teach communication and storytelling for entrepreneurs, and also I'm head of the international programs. And today I have the privilege to be talking to a person that I was really looking forward to get to know. He's not only a CEO, an investor, a professor at Stanford, but he has created a lot of companies and startups, and he's a mentor to a multitude of founders. I'm here today with Bret Waters, and he is simply amazing. Bret, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Bruno. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Listen, I just heard you launch the new book. Can you tell us a little bit about this book?
Sure. So, as you said, I've been in Silicon Valley my whole life. I have founded a few companies, and today I teach entrepreneurship at Stanford University. And I'm really passionate about the democratization of entrepreneurship, meaning that I think one of the really exciting things about 2024 is that anybody can launch a startup. In other words, you don't have to have a rich uncle. You don't have to have a friend in the venture capital business. You don't have to have a whole bunch of money yourself or connections or anything, because the tools required to create a startup today are more widely available than ever in history. And on top of that, I think that when we look at all the problems that the world faces today, that I think entrepreneurs have a key role to play in solving problems and creating opportunity all over the world. So I've got this real passion for the democratization of entrepreneurship, and that really is the impetus behind the book. It's just kind of wanting to take everything that I have learned in my career and everything that I have learned by working with hundreds of startup founders at Stanford and at Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship, and taking all of that and putting it into a book that can help other people more reliably and efficiently and effectively launch their own startup.
I love it. Yeah, and I fully agree with you. Indeed, it's very nice to see that there is room for everybody who wants to be an entrepreneur. And on that note, on your previous talk, I loved what you said about what is the key factors or the key traits an entrepreneur has to have in order to be successful.
So there's a bunch, and we start with where the startup idea comes from, right? That there's this mythology that it's all about the idea, right? The startup success is all about the idea. And so you got to come up with a really great idea. And then if you have a great idea, then investors will get excited and give you a bunch of money, and you can launch a successful company. But if you look at history, it's actually hard to find examples of startups that were a success because of the idea. And in fact, most of the time the original idea fails. And in the book I give some examples of famous startups that today they're billion-dollar success stories, but their original idea completely failed. But the team was smart enough, resilient enough, driven enough that they found a path to success even when the original idea fails. And so in the book I talk about how most great startups begin not with some wild-ass idea, but with noticing a problem we're solving. And so that's really where it begins, is notice a problem we're solving, and then hypothesize about how you could solve that problem. And stay married to the problem, but be willing to be flexible and agile with regard to the best way to solve the problem. And that's kind of, that's in the book, that's how I talk about the place to begin. Is begin by notice a problem we're solving, hypothesize about how to solve it, and then figure out ways in which you can test your hypothesis.
I love it. So the truth of the matter is we are always looking for problems, and the solutions varies. And thinking about these problems, how should an entrepreneur go about learning about opportunities within this problem? What does he need to do? Is it a matter of communicating better with their ICPs? Is it making good research? How do you look into this? How do you think about it?
So, it seems simple, but I think it's mostly about talking to prospective customers. So you've noticed a problem we're solving, and now you have an idea of how that might be solved. But it's just an idea from your perspective. ultimately what matters is whether you're making customers happy, right? Well, at the end of the day, all that matters is, are you solving a problem that customers are willing to pay to have it solved, right? And the only way to really know that is to spend time out talking to customers, put yourself in customers' shoes. There's this framework called the design thinking framework, which is basically an engineering framework for developing products that succeed. And the first step on the design thinking framework is empathize, meaning you don't start building the product until you first really put yourself in the customer's shoes, understand the customer's needs and expectations. So the first step is empathize.
Amazing. I love this approach on empathize. And I remember one of your posts, because if I think about the startup process, right? I have an idea. I need to check if this idea resonates with my customers and if it makes sense.
Right.
And the way most founders do this is through an MVP.
Right.
And I remember one of your posts saying that MVP is the most misunderstood term in startup land.
That's correct.
Would you mind giving your perspective on this?
Sure. So Eric Ries wrote a book called The Lean Startup.
Yep.
Very popular book, very successful book, great book. And in the book, he popularizes this concept of an MVP, a minimum viable product, and that you need to one of the ways in which you learn about customers is to create a kind of a small version of your product, get it out there in front of customers, and you can learn from that. And today, if you walk through the coffee shops in Palo Alto, you'll see all kinds of wannabe entrepreneurs sitting there on their laptops working on their startup idea. And you'll hear them sometimes say, as soon as my MVP is done, then I'll be able to show it to investors and get funded.
Wow.
Which is a complete misunderstanding of what Eric Ries talks about in the book. So Eric Ries talks about in the book about the purpose of an MVP is to learn from customers, right? So I always say that mediocre entrepreneurs build an MVP to show something. Great entrepreneurs build an MVP to learn something, right? That is the purpose of an MVP, is to learn. And so, thinking that all you can do is you're going to create an MVP and then show it to investors and you're going to get funded, complete misunderstanding. Because, creating a clickable prototype, for example, today that's a skill that the average 12-year-old has. And so, going and pitching a venture capitalist saying, look at my clickable prototype of my awesome product, this is my MVP, all you've proven to the venture capitalist is that you have the skills of a 12-year-old. Wow. You haven't actually proven to him that you have taken time to understand customers' needs and expectations and put an MVP out there in the market and see how they interact with it and such, right?
I love it. I love the approach that you said that MVP is made for learning and not for showing.
Correct.
And it resonated even further with me thinking about the AI age that we are entering, where information is more a commodity rather than anything else.
For sure.
If a 12-year-old can use the same information that we can, if we put an MVP just to showcase, we are going to have mediocre products.
Correct.
And that's not the way to go about it. I love this approach. It's very interesting.
So I say that one should think of the MVP not as a thing. Instead, think of it as a process. That you should always be thinking about how can I test this new set of features, right? And the way to test that new set of features is to put those features in front of some customers and see whether or not they find them useful, see if they understand them, et cetera, right? And so it's not like you build your MVP and then you're done with that step and now you move on to something else. It's think of the MVP as being a process, that you should always be thinking, what is the smallest possible experiment I could do right now that would provide me the greatest possible learning, right? Okay. And this is why, the platforms with scale like Google and Meta and such, they have a huge advantage, because if they have an idea on some new features, they can expose those new features to a very small set of customers on the platform, see how they react to them, see how they use them, see how they're getting value, right? And then decide whether or not to refine them, whether or not to make those features available to everybody. So again, they're using the MVP not as a thing, but as a process, that we always want to validate our assumptions. We always want to find out whether customers find this new set of features valuable.
Love it.
I had a student once who said to me, so I get all this, I get the whole MVP and I get the rapid iterations and everything. So when do I know it's time to stop iterating? And the answer, of course, is never.
There you go.
You never stop iterating.
Yep.
You never stop testing your assumptions. You never stop getting features out in front of customers and see whether or not they're useful to them. It's an ongoing process. So again, I think you're better off not thinking of the MVP as a thing, but instead thinking of it as an ongoing process that every company should be using.
What an insight. Learning process rather than showcasing something clickable. I love this. And let me switch gears a little bit here. I know you're a mentor to a bunch of founders and startups. If you were to say like your top 3 things you see that founders must have in order to succeed when going to a venture capital or when putting their business together, what would those things be?
So last quarter, I had the co-founder of Tesla, Mark Tarpenning, come and speak to my students at Stanford. And he talked about how important it is to be a great evangelist, and that all startup founders need to be able to articulate, tell the crisp, clear, and compelling story about what they're working on and why it matters, right? And that one of the reasons is because you want to bring people along on your, on your journey, not only co-founders and perhaps employees and investors, but also, thought leaders in the space, potential future partners, right? You want to, even at the early stages, you want to be kind of assembling this larger team around you that is going to drive you to success. And so Mark Tarpenning, co-founder of Tesla, he's now a venture capitalist. And he said to me, he said, it's always amazing when an entrepreneur comes and pitches me, and I say, and he says, I've been working on this for 3 years now. I'm a solo founder, and I say, so 3 years, solo founder, great. So do you have an advisory board? Do you have partners? Like, no, not any of that. And Mark says, so how can you be doing this for 3 years and you haven't been able to kind of recruit anybody in on the mission?
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely.
So this is why I say that I think, one of the fundamental skills that any entrepreneur has to have is storytelling.
Wow.
And that, most people, when they think about storytelling, they think about pitching, and they think raising money. But the reality is that there's all kinds of ways in which entrepreneurs are using storytelling, right? That's how you're getting your co-founders, that's how you're getting your early customers, that's how you're getting your partners. It's all storytelling. And if you're a good storyteller, you should, within about 6 months, you should have a following.
Exactly.
And if after 3 years you have no following, that's a big red flag.
Wow, I love this. This resonates so much with me. We teach storytelling here at Link, and I have the privilege to do that. And the very myth we try to break with our entrepreneurs, when they come and say, hey, listen, venture capitals and investors are 100% logical.
No.
And we say,
No.
absolutely they're not.
No.
What connects, what drives the call to action from an investor side is the emotional connection.
The emotional connection, yep.
And that's something we try to, and I want to have your perspective on it, because we teach your origin story need to be connected with your vision story.
Yep.
Why did you get here? Why this problem matter? Why is you the person?
Yep.
But more importantly, tell me where you want to be. Because if I get into the middle of how you're going to get there, is actually very questionable and challengeable from an investor perspective to disagree with the plan that you have.
Right.
But if you put those two together, then you get what I believe is most important. You get a next conversation, and a next conversation,
Correct.
and you keep it alive.
Right.
That's the way we look at it.
Yeah, so I think there's 2 or 3 things in what you just said that are kind of worth reiterating. So the last thing you said is that, the point is to get another conversation, right? So I once worked with a guy who was the most disciplined salesperson I've ever worked with. Very successful sales guy, and super disciplined. And one of the ways in which he was super disciplined is that whenever we would go into a meeting with a customer, a sales call with a customer, he would stop me before we went in. He'd stop me outside, and this guy would say to me, what do we want the outcome of this meeting to be? So he would never go into a meeting without being clear on what our desired outcome was. Right? And I think that, successful salespeople, they're good at that, right? They're always clear on what is my desired outcome from this meeting.
Fully agree.
And so for pitching, which is basically just a sales process, it's the same thing, right? And that, you're not going to get an investment decision off of a 3-minute pitch. Not going to happen.
Ever. I agree.
So the purpose of a 3-minute pitch is to get another meeting.
There you
right?
go.
And so, as you said, I think that that's really key to when you're thinking about pitching and what goes into a pitch. That the purpose of a pitch usually is to get another meeting, because an investment decision is usually going to take several meetings. It's not going to happen in one meeting. And then also you talked about kind of communicating, your personal story and stuff. And I always tell my students that one of the most important things to get into a pitch is, why are you exactly the right entrepreneur for this venture?
Beautiful.
Right? Get that in there somewhere. Because a couple things. So one is, if I'm the investor, I want to know that there is something burning deep down inside of you that is going to make this thing a success, right? And so something about, the passion that you have for solving this problem and where that comes from is a signal to me that you're going to have the tenacity and the resilience to see this thing through to completion. And also, just simply from a storytelling perspective, first-person stories are the most engaging, right?
Indeed.
They just are. That first-person stories are the most engaging. And so, it's always funny to me when I sit through somebody's entire pitch and I never heard anything about their personal story. I never heard anything about why they have passion for this particular startup idea. Because to me, those are the most important things.
Fully agreed. This is gold. And Bret, I guess you're touching on a very important point, that when it comes to the fundraising process, is much more of a communication process and a sales process rather than anything else.
Yep.
So it doesn't make sense for entrepreneurs to believe that in the very first interaction with a VC, they're going to get funded. They need to build a relationship out of it. And that's why communication is something very strategic. It's not only a matter of speaking well, fluently, but it's how you use communication strategically. And I want to wrap it up, given your time and everything that you have to do. I love a professor from Stanford called Matt Abrahams that has a podcast.
I know Matt very well. Yeah.
And he does a question that I love. What are your 3 key ingredients to a very strategic communication from an entrepreneur's standpoint?
Say it again.
3 ingredients for a very strategic communication on the entrepreneurship side.
So you're talking about, for example, in a pitch, what are the 3 most important things?
Pitch.
So we already talked about the personal story, the personal connection.
Okay.
I think at the end of the day, team is what matters, and so something about the team and how you put together this team.
Okay.
And I think that great entrepreneurs are able to see the big picture vision and also be able to zoom in on the details today, right? So I love the expression that to win you have to think of the future, but to survive you have to think in the present.
I love it.
So if you're running a company, to win you have to have the vision of where do we want to be 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, right? But you also have to make sure you can make payroll next week.
Exactly.
Right? And some people naturally are really great at the big picture vision, but they're terrible at the present day details. And so they never get to the big picture vision.
I love it.
There are other people that are so incredibly down in the weeds with the small details today that they have no idea where they want to be 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, right? And so I think that great entrepreneurs are good at that. Great entrepreneurs are great at seeing the big picture vision, and then understanding how everything I do today needs to align with where I want to be 3 years from now.
I love it.
And as I said, I think it's a rare trait to be able to do both those things. And so in terms of strategic communications, I think that, obviously everybody wants to hear the big picture vision, but they also want to feel confident that you are good enough with the details that you kind of understand that there are all these thousands of little things that are going to happen for you to get to that big picture vision. So I think that, communicating that in any kind of a strategic pitch sort of situation is key.
I love it. Bret, thank you so much for your time. Your book is amazing. I cannot wait to have it in Portuguese. I'm really looking forward. It is a privilege to have you here at Link School. Thank you so much for coming.
It's been great being here, and it's a great conversation.
Thank you.